The coldest winters in the Pacific Northwest could never rival the chill inside the Kensington estate. To the outside world, Alpha Garrett was a pillar of strength, a grieving widower who built a respectable empire from timber and steel. But behind the wrought iron gates of the Silver Pines pack, he was a monster. He didn't just break his daughter's spirit. He systematically crushed it under the weight of his own resentment. Maeve was the pack's darkest secret, a scapegoat for a man meant to be her protector. But secrets in the werewolf world have a way of howling into the night, especially when the Alpha King comes knocking. The Silver Pines pack house was a sprawling, 3-story mansion built from ancient cedar and riverstone, nestled deep in the shadow of Mount Rainier. To the humans who occasionally drove past the private access roads, it looked like a luxurious corporate retreat. To Maeve Kensington, it was a beautifully constructed purgatory. Maeve was 21, though her frail frame and shadowed eyes made her look both agonizingly younger and decades older. She was the only daughter of Alpha Garrett Kensington, a fact that the entire pack had spent the last 15 years pretending wasn't true. It started when Maeve was 6. Her mother, the beloved Luna Rosalind, had succumbed to a sudden, aggressive illness that the pack healers could not diagnose in time. In his grief, Garrett's mind fractured. He needed someone to blame, and his eyes fell upon the quiet, observant child who shared Rosalind's striking emerald eyes but lacked her robust, dominant wolf spirit. Maeve was a late bloomer, her wolf dormant and silent, which in Garrett's twisted, grief-stricken logic meant she had somehow drained her mother's life force to sustain her own useless existence. By the time she was 10, Maeve was moved from the family wing to a small, drafty room adjacent to the laundry quarters in the basement. By 15, she was entirely stripped of her title. She was not a pack member. She was property. "Did you scrub the floors in the East Wing, or were you just staring out the window again?" Garrett's voice boomed, echoing off the high, vaulted ceilings of the kitchen. Maeve kept her head bowed, her hands submerged in a sink full of scalding, soapy water. "I finished them, Alpha." She had learned long ago never to call him father. The last time she had made that mistake, she had spent 3 days locked in the root cellar without a coat. Garrett stepped closer, his heavy leather boots thudding against the imported Italian tile. He was a massive man, his presence suffocating. He grabbed the back of her neck, his thick fingers digging into the sensitive skin near her collarbone. Maeve forced herself not to flinch. Flinching only excited his cruel wolf. "Beta Donovan tells me you were seen near the perimeter fencing yesterday," Garrett growled softly, leaning in so his warm breath ruffled her dull, unkempt brown hair. "Are you planning on leaving us, Maeve? Planning on running away and telling the human authorities tall tales?" "No, Alpha," Maeve whispered, her voice trembling despite her best efforts. "I was gathering wild mint for the kitchens. Mrs. Higgins asked me to." Garrett released her with a violent shove, sending her hip crashing into the edge of the industrial counter. A sharp pain radiated down her leg, but she bit her lip, swallowing the gasp. "Don't lie to me," Garrett snapped, adjusting the cuffs of his tailored suit. He operated a massive logging conglomerate, rubbing shoulders with human politicians and business elites. He was a master of the mask, charming, philanthropic, and deeply respected. It made the reality of his abuse all the more isolating for Maeve. Who would ever believe her? "The Alpha King is arriving tomorrow evening," Garrett announced, his tone shifting to cold business. "It is a standard territorial audit. Kalen Hawthorne is a ruthless, observant bastard. He will be looking for weaknesses in my leadership. You are the ultimate weakness, Maeve. A pathetic, wolfless stain on my lineage." Maeve kept her eyes glued to the soapy water, watching a single sud pop and vanish. "You will remain in the sub-basement until his convoy leaves," Garrett ordered. "If you are seen, if you make a sound, if Hawthorne even catches a whiff of your pathetic scent, I will drag you into the deep woods myself and let the rogues have you. Do you understand?" "Yes, Alpha," she replied softly. "Look at me when I speak to you," he roared, backhanding her across the face. The force of the blow sent Maeve to the floor, her cheek stinging violently as the metallic taste of copper filled her mouth. She didn't cry. She hadn't cried in front of him in years. Slowly, she pushed herself up to her knees, looking up at the man who was supposed to be her shield against the world. "I understand, Alpha," she repeated, her voice dead and hollow. Garrett sneered in disgust, turning on his heel. "Get out of my sight. Go pack whatever rags you need for the next 3 days." As he left the kitchen, Maeve pressed a damp rag to her swelling cheek. The physical pain was a dull ache compared to the crushing weight of her reality. She was utterly alone. The pack members either actively participated in her degradation to win Garrett's favor, or they looked away, too terrified of the Alpha's wrath to intervene. She was a ghost haunting her own life, broken and waiting to fade away completely. Alpha King Kalen Hawthorne did not tolerate inefficiencies, and he certainly did not tolerate secrets. As his sleek, black SUV convoy wound its way up the mountain roads toward the Silver Pines territory, Kalen stared out the tinted window, his jaw set in a hard line. He was a formidable figure, tall and broad-shouldered, with eyes the color of a stormy sea and a heavy, ancient power thrumming beneath his skin. At 32, he had ruled the unified North American Pax for 7 years, bringing order to a chaotic, fractured society. Garrett Kensington's financial reports are flawless, noted Gideon, Kalen's beta and most trusted confidant, swiping through a tablet in the seat opposite him. Timber exports are up 18%. The Pax infrastructure is top tier. Honestly, Kalen, I'm not sure why you insisted on this detour. Silver Pines is the poster child for stability. Kalen shifted, his massive wolf pacing restlessly in his mind. Paperwork can be forged, Gideon. Wealth can mask rot. You smell something? Gideon asked, his brow furrowing. I don't know what it is, Kalen admitted, his voice a low rumble. But my wolf has been on edge since we crossed the state line. There is a dissonance here, an imbalance. The Pax harmony feels artificial. As the vehicles pulled through the wrought iron gates of the estate, the grandeur of the Kensington Pack House revealed itself. The lawn was impeccably manicured, and the Pack's elite guard stood at perfect attention. Alpha Garrett stood at the front steps, flanked by Beta Donovan and the high-ranking council members. Garrett wore a welcoming, practiced smile, radiating the confident, stable energy of a prosperous leader. Kalen stepped out of the SUV, the crisp mountain air hitting his lungs. Instantly, every wolf on the lawn lowered their heads in a synchronized show of submission, exposing their necks to the king. Welcome to Silver Pines, Your Majesty, Garrett boomed, stepping forward to offer a respectful bow. It is our highest honor to host you. Kalen's piercing gray eyes swept over Garrett, then over the assembled pack. They looked healthy, well-fed, and disciplined. Yet, Kalen's wolf scratched at the back of his skull, agitated. The scent of the pack was standard pine, damp earth, wood smoke, but beneath it, masked by heavy industrial cleaning supplies and expensive perfumes, there was an undercurrent of fear. Alpha Garrett, Kalen acknowledged, his tone polite but carefully neutral. Your estate is as impressive as your ledgers suggest. We strive for excellence, my king. Please, come inside. We have prepared a feast in your honor, and the guest wing has been readied for you and your men. Meanwhile, 3 floors below the grand foyer, Maeve sat on a damp, cold concrete floor. The sub-basement was essentially a storage vault for discarded furniture and old records, lit only by a single, flickering fluorescent bulb. The heavy steel door had been locked from the outside by Donovan hours ago. She pulled a thin, moth-eaten wool blanket tighter around her shivering shoulders. The temperature down here was brutally cold, seeping through her worn denim jeans and oversized sweater. She pressed her knees to her chest, listening to the muffled, heavy footsteps vibrating through the ceiling above. The king had arrived. Maeve closed her eyes, imagining what it must be like up there. The warmth of the roaring fireplaces, the smell of roasted meats and rich wines, the sound of music and laughter. She wondered what the king was like. Was he as cruel as her father? The story said Kalen Hawthorne was a ruthless warrior who had slaughtered rogue armies single-handedly. If he was a monster, he would likely get along wonderfully with Garrett. Her bruised cheek throbbed in time with her heartbeat. She reached up, gently tracing the swollen skin. For a fleeting second, a spark of pure, unadulterated rage flared in her chest. A quiet voice, buried deep within her, whispered, "How long will you let him do this?" But the spark was quickly smothered by reality. She had no money, no ID, no formal education, and a dormant wolf. She was a prisoner trapped in an invisible cage, and the only way out was in a pine box. Maeve rested her head against the damp concrete wall and resigned herself to the cold. Upstairs, Kalen sat in Garrett's lavish study, reviewing maps of the territory. The conversation was flowing smoothly, Garrett answering every inquiry with polished perfection, but Kalen couldn't focus. "Is there an issue, Your Majesty?" Garrett asked, noticing the king's distraction. Kalen stood up, walking toward the window. "Your pack seems incredibly well-ordered, Garrett. Almost too ordered. Tell me, do you have any Omegas or pack members currently in isolation or the infirmary?" Garrett's heart skipped a beat, but his face remained a mask of polite confusion. "None, my king. We are blessed with excellent health. Why do you ask?" "Because," Kalen said, turning to lock eyes with the Alpha, "I am picking up a scent. It's faint, smothered, but it reeks of distress." Garrett forced a light chuckle. That might be the wild foxes near the eastern ridge. They sometimes get caught in the old traps left by human hunters before we bought the land. I will have a patrol clear them out immediately." Kalen stared at him for a long, agonizing moment. His wolf was growling now, pacing furiously. Foxes. It didn't smell like a fox. It smelled like sorrow. "See that you do," Kalen murmured. The grand banquet hall was a spectacle of wealth. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, golden glow over long tables laden with roasted venison, wild salmon, and overflowing bowls of winter vegetables. The elite of the Silver Pines pack were dressed in their finest, laughing and drinking, performing the role of the perfect pack for their king. Kalen sat at the head table, Gideon to his right and Garrett to his left. Despite the excellent food and the finest bourbon, Kalen's mood was darkening by the minute. The dissonance he had felt upon arrival was amplifying. The pack's joy felt entirely performative. He watched the way Beta Donovan flinched when Garrett sharply cleared his throat. He noticed the way the serving staff kept their eyes glued to the floor, moving with a rigid, terrified precision. Disaster struck an hour into the feast. Down in the sub-basement, the old pipes running along the ceiling had suddenly groaned and burst, flooding the concrete floor with freezing water. The water rose quickly, threatening to submerge the electrical boxes. Panicked, Maeve had pounded on the heavy steel door. If the water reached the wiring, she would be electrocuted. A young guard, left behind to monitor the lower levels, had panicked and unlocked the door to stop the flooding. In the chaos, Maeve had slipped past him, soaked to the bone, shivering violently, and desperate to find a dry corner. She didn't mean to go upstairs. She just wanted to find the secondary utility closet on the ground floor to hide. But the pack house was a labyrinth, and in her panicked, freezing state, she took a wrong turn through the servant corridors. In the banquet hall, Kalen was just raising his glass to offer a customary toast when it hit him. It was like a physical blow to the chest. The scent cut through the roasted meat, the heavy perfumes, and the wood smoke. It smelled like rain-soaked earth, crushed lavender, and a deep, agonizing sorrow. Kalen's glass shattered in his hand. Bourbon and crystal rained down on the pristine white tablecloth. "Your Majesty," Garrett gasped, jumping up. "Are you all right?" Kalen didn't hear him. The roaring in his ears was deafening. His wolf, the ancient, powerful beast that commanded thousands, was clawing at his mind, howling a single, earth-shattering word. "Mate." Kalen stood up slowly, his eyes flashing a brilliant, terrifying gold. The entire hall went dead silent. The music stopped. The laughter died in their throats. The king's aura exploded outward, a suffocating wave of pure, dominant alpha power that forced every wolf in the room to their knees. Even Garrett stumbled, gripping the edge of the table as the air was sucked from the room. "Where?" Kalen snarled, his voice dropping an octave, echoing with the dual tone of his wolf. "Is she my king?" Garrett stammered, his polished veneer cracking for the first time. "I don't understand." Before Garrett could finish, the heavy wooden doors leading from the kitchen corridors swung open. There stood Maeve. She was a ghost in the opulent room. Her clothes were soaked and clinging to her frail frame. Her lips blue from the cold. Her brown hair was plastered to her face, and the dark, angry bruise on her cheek was stark and horrifying against her pale skin. She froze, her eyes widening in absolute terror as she realized she had stumbled directly into the grand hall. Kalen's golden eyes locked onto her. The bond snapped into place, a tether of raw, undeniable electricity connecting his soul to hers. He saw the bruise. He saw the shivering. He saw the terror in his mate's eyes. "Maeve!" Garrett roared, his rage momentarily overriding his fear of the king. The idiot girl was ruining everything. "I told you to stay." Garrett lunged forward, moving fast to grab her by the hair, intending to drag her out of sight before the king could ask questions. He raised his hand, fully prepared to strike her back down to the floor. He never made it. Kalen moved with a speed that defied logic. He vaulted over the high table, crossing the immense distance of the hall in a blur of motion. Just as Garrett's hand descended toward Maeve's cowering form, Kalen intercepted him. The king's massive hand wrapped around Garrett's throat, lifting the 300-pound alpha off the ground as if he weighed nothing. "Touch her," Kalen whispered, his voice vibrating with a lethal, terrifying calmness. "And I will rip your head from your shoulders and feed it to my hounds." Garrett choked, his legs kicking uselessly in the air, his eyes bulging as he stared into the face of a god of war. Maeve collapsed to her knees, trembling, wrapping her arms around herself. She squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the violence, waiting for the inevitable punishment that always followed her existence. But instead of a blow, she felt a sudden, enveloping warmth. Kalen dropped Garrett like a piece of trash, letting the alpha crash to the floor, gasping for air. The king stripped off his heavy, fur-lined coat and knelt on the broken glass, wrapping the massive garment tightly around Maeve's shivering shoulders. He reached out, his large, calloused hand hovering inches from her face, terrified to frighten her further. He gently brushed a wet strand of hair from her bruised cheek. "Who did this to you?" Kaelin asked, his voice breaking with an emotion the ruthless king had never felt before. Maeve opened her eyes, looking up into the stormy gray depths of Kaelin Hawthorne. For the first time in 15 years, she didn't see a monster. She saw a shield. "My father," she whispered. The entire hall collectively stopped breathing. Kaelin slowly stood up, turning his back to Maeve to face the gasping, terrified Garrett on the floor. "Gideon," Kaelin commanded, the absolute authority of the king rolling through the room like a shockwave. "Lock down the estate. No one leaves. No one moves." Kaelin looked down at Garrett, his eyes burning with the promise of a slow, agonizing death. "You didn't tell me you had a daughter, Garrett," Kaelin said softly. "And you certainly didn't tell me she was my queen." The silence in the grand banquet hall was absolute, heavy with the suffocating weight of Kaelin's unleashed aura. The Alpha King's power did not just demand submission. It physically pressed upon the chests of every wolf in the room, forcing them to remain pinned to the floor. Beta Donovan, usually a towering figure of intimidation, was practically trembling against the marble tiles, his eyes fixed firmly downward. Kaelin knelt before Maeve, his imposing frame acting as a barrier between her and the monsters she called family. The heavy, fur-lined coat he had draped over her swallowed her frail body. She was trembling so violently that her teeth chattered, a rhythmic clicking sound that echoed like gunshots in the quiet room. "Gideon," Kaelin repeated, not looking away from his mate. His voice was a low, terrifying rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. "Secure the perimeter. Disarm the Silver Pines guard. Any wolf who resists is to be considered a traitor to the crown and dealt with accordingly." "Yes, my king," Gideon replied, stepping over a spilled platter of roasted meats to draw his sidearm and signal the king's elite guard. Within seconds, the royal enforcers moved through the hall, seamlessly taking control of the stunned and terrified pack leadership. Garrett, still gasping for breath on the floor where Kaelin had dropped him, finally managed to push himself up onto his elbows. His face was a mottled, bruised purple, his pristine tailored suit ruined by spilled wine and shattered glass. "Your Majesty, please," Garrett wheezed, panic finally cracking his meticulously crafted facade. "You do not understand. The girl she is unwell. She is unstable. My late wife Rosalind, Speak her name again," Kaelin snarled, his eyes flashing brilliant gold as he slowly turned his head to glare at Garrett. "And I will tear your tongue from your mouth." Garrett's mouth snapped shut. Kaelin turned his attention back to Maeve. He moved with agonizing slowness, telegraphing every movement so as not to startle her. He reached out, his large, scarred hands gently cupping her frozen cheeks. The mate bond hummed beneath his skin, a desperate, frantic energy trying to soothe her battered spirit. Through the bond, Kaelin felt a sickening wave of chronic pain, malnourishment, and a deep, bottomless well of despair. "I am going to pick you up now, Maeve," Kaelin whispered, his tone softer than anyone in his inner circle had ever heard. "I will not hurt you. I promise you. On my life and my crown, no one in this room will ever lay a hand on you again." Maeve looked at him, her emerald eyes wide and glassy. She couldn't process the words. Queen. He had called her his queen. For 15 years, she had been a ghost, a punching bag, a stain on the floorboards. Now, the most powerful man in their world was kneeling in broken glass for her. The sheer sensory overload, combined with the freezing temperature of her soaked clothes, was too much. Her eyes rolled back, and she collapsed forward. Kaelin caught her before she hit the floor. He scooped her effortlessly into his arms, holding her tightly against his chest. She weighed nothing, barely more than a child. The realization fueled a fresh wave of murderous rage. "Gideon," Kaelin barked, standing to his full height. "Have Dr. Harrison meet me in my quarters immediately. Bring all emergency medical supplies." "Right away," Gideon affirmed. "And Gideon?" Kaelin paused, glaring down at the cowering alpha of Silver Pines. "Tear Garrett's private offices apart. Every floorboard, every safe, every server. I want to know exactly how a monster managed to paint himself as a saint." As Kaelin carried Maeve out of the hall, the royal guards hauled Garrett and Beta Donovan to their feet, dragging them toward the estate's own holding cells. Hours later, the illusion of the Silver Pines pack was entirely dismantled. Gideon sat in Garrett's sprawling mahogany office, surrounded by stacks of financial documents, ledger books, and decrypted hard drives. What he found made his stomach churn. "It wasn't just abuse, Kaelin," Gideon said, his voice grim over the secure comms link as Kaylin paced the floor of the guest suite upstairs. It was a highly calculated embezzlement operation. Gideon pulled up a series of banking transfers on his tablet. When Rosalind died, she left behind an independent trust, the Rosalind Estate Portfolio. It was immense, heavily invested in offshore accounts through Banque Privée Espirito Santo in Switzerland, and managed by Bessemer Trust. Garrett couldn't touch the principal. The stipulations of the trust explicitly stated that upon Maeve's 18th birthday, or the date of her first wolf shift, whichever came first, the entire fortune, and a controlling 60% stake in the Pax Timber conglomerate, would transfer directly to her. Upstairs, Kaylin stopped pacing. His knuckles turned white as he gripped the edge of a mahogany dresser. He hid her to steal her inheritance. Exactly, Gideon confirmed. Garrett funneled the dividends through a shell company in Delaware called Apex Timber Holdings. He's been draining millions to fund his political campaigns with the human elite and build this lavish estate. If Maeve ever shifted, or if she was ever recognized by the pack as a rightful heir, he would lose everything. He had to keep her broken. He had to keep her hidden. Her wolf, Kaylin murmured, looking toward the heavy oak door of the bedroom where Dr. Harrison was currently treating Maeve. She's 21. Even with severe trauma, a pureblood alpha's daughter should have shifted years ago. The bond. I can feel her wolf, Gideon, but it's buried. It feels suffocated. I think Dr. Harrison might have the answer to that, Gideon said softly. I'll let him explain. But Kaylin, Garrett Kensington isn't going to survive the week, is he? No, Kaylin replied, his voice devoid of all warmth. He is not. The bedroom was stiflingly warm. Kaylin had ordered a fire built in the massive stone hearth, and the air smelled faintly of burning cedar and medical antiseptic. Dr. Harrison, a silver-haired wolf who had served as the royal physician for 3 decades, stepped out of the bedroom, his expression uncharacteristically shaken. He carefully closed the door behind him and turned to face his king. How is she? Kaylin demanded, stepping forward. Harrison let out a heavy sigh, removing his spectacles and rubbing the bridge of his nose. She is stabilized, my king. I have her on an IV drip for severe dehydration and malnourishment. I've treated her immediate injuries, the contusion on her cheek, 2 cracked ribs that look to be a few weeks old, and several lacerations on her back and shoulders. Kaylin's jaw clenched so hard his teeth groaned. And her wolf? Why is she dormant? It is worse than dormancy, Kaylin, doctor, Harrison said grimly. He held up a small, digitized blood analysis monitor. I ran a full toxicology screen. Her blood is saturated with heavy metals and a synthetic, concentrated form of liquid wolfsbane. It's a custom chemical cocktail, likely administered through her food or water over the course of at least 10 years. Kaylin felt the floor drop out from beneath him. Wolfsbane, in small doses, was a temporary sedative for aggressive wolves. In continuous, daily doses over a decade, it was a brutal, agonizing poison that attacked the nervous system and actively paralyzed the inner wolf. Garrett was poisoning her, Kaylin whispered, the horror of the revelation settling over him. He was chemically castrating her spirit, Harrison corrected, his voice laced with professional disgust. Every time her wolf tried to surface, the poison would burn it back down. It explains the chronic shivering, the frail bone structure, the stunted physical development. Her body has been in a constant, agonizing state of chemical warfare since she was a child. It is a miracle her organs haven't failed. Her willpower. Kaylin, the sheer strength it took just to stay alive under these conditions is staggering. Can you reverse it? Yes, Harrison nodded firmly. I have already administered an aggressive binding agent to flush the wolfsbane from her system, but the withdrawal will be violent. Her wolf has been locked in a chemical cage for a decade and a half. When the poison clears, the beast is going to wake up, and it is going to be furious, terrified, and completely feral. She will need her mate. Kaylin bypassed the doctor, pushing open the heavy bedroom door. Maeve was awake. She was propped up against a mountain of plush, white pillows, dwarfed by the massive king-sized bed. She wore one of Kaylin's soft, oversized t-shirts, her thin arm tethered to an IV pole. When Kaylin entered, she flinched violently, her breath catching in her throat, her eyes darting to the door as if looking for an escape route. It's just me, Kaylin said softly, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. He stayed near the doorway, refusing to crowd her. Dr. Harrison said you were awake. How are you feeling? Maeve stared at him. She looked at the luxurious room, the roaring fire, and then down at her own clean hands. I don't understand. Her voice was a raspy, broken whisper. Why am I in the guest wing? If Alpha Garrett finds me here, Garrett is in a holding cell, Kaylin interrupted gently. He is chained to a wall, and he will never see the light of day again. Maeve froze. Her mind struggled to compute the information. Garrett was a god in her world. Untouchable. Invincible. He will kill you. Kaelin let out a soft, humorless chuckle. He can try. But I am the Alpha King, Maeve. And you are my mate. He watched her process the word, mate. She knew what it meant theoretically. But in her reality, attachments only brought pain. I don't have a wolf, she whispered, looking down at her hands, shame coloring her pale cheeks. I'm broken, defective. He always said I was just a leech. He lied to you, Kaelin said, taking a slow step forward. He poisoned you, Maeve. He drugged your food with wolfsbane for years to keep your wolf suppressed. He did it to steal the trust fund your mother left for you in the Rosalind estate portfolio. You aren't broken. You are the rightful alpha heir of Silver Pines, and the queen of the North American packs. Tears, hot and fast, finally broke through the dam Maeve had built around her heart for 15 years. She began to sob deep, agonizing, chest-heaving sobs. It wasn't just sadness. It was the explosive release of a lifetime of betrayal. Her father hadn't just hated her. He had systematically tortured her for money. Kaelin couldn't stay away any longer. He crossed the room and sat on the edge of the mattress, carefully pulling her into his arms. She stiffened for a fraction of a second before collapsing against his chest, burying her face in the crook of his neck. He wrapped his massive arms around her, burying his face in her damp hair, letting his steady heartbeat ground her. Cry for what was stolen from you, Maeve. Kaelin murmured fiercely into her ear, his own eyes burning. Let it out, because starting tomorrow we are going to make them bleed for every single tear. Down in the subterranean holding cells, the temperature hovered just above freezing. Garrett Kensington hung from the ceiling by heavy, silver-lined chains. His arms stretched painfully above his head. The silver burned his skin, leaving raw, smoking welts around his wrists. The heavy iron door swung open, screeching on its hinges. Kaelin stepped into the cell. He had left Maeve sleeping peacefully under the heavy sedatives Dr. Harrison had provided. Now, the king had come for his due. Your Majesty, Garrett spat, coughing up a mouthful of blood. You are making a mistake. The Council, my political allies in Seattle and Portland. Apex Timber Holdings employs thousands. If I disappear, the human authorities will investigate. You will expose our kind. Kaelin walked slowly around the chained Alpha, his boots clicking sharply against the concrete. You think your shell companies will save you? Kaelin asked, his voice dripping with deadly amusement. Gideon has already seized your offshore accounts at Banque Privée Espirito Santo. We have transferred every stolen cent back into Maeve's trust. As for your human political allies, an anonymous tip was just sent to the IRS and the FBI detailing massive corporate fraud, tax evasion, and embezzlement. Garrett's eyes widened in horror. No. By morning, Garrett Kensington will be a disgraced fugitive in the human world, Kaelin continued, stopping directly in front of the beaten man. Your empire is gone. Your reputation is ash. She is my property, Garrett roared, thrashing against the chains, his wolf snapping wildly at the surface. She killed her mother. She deserved the basement. She deserved the cold. Kaelin's fist lashed out with blinding speed, connecting with Garrett's ribcage. The sickening crack of bone echoed in the small cell, followed immediately by Garrett's agonizing scream. She is my queen, Kaelin whispered, grabbing Garrett by his throat and squeezing until the Alpha's eyes rolled back. And when the wolfsbane clears her system, and her wolf finally wakes, I am going to bring her down here, and I am going to let her decide exactly how you die. Kaelin dropped the broken Alpha, turning his back and walking out of the cell. The reckoning had just begun, and the Silver Pines pack was about to learn what happens when you try to bury a queen. The withdrawal hit Maeve 48 hours after Dr. Harrison administered the binding agent. It did not arrive as a slow, creeping ache, but as a violent, catastrophic explosion within her nervous system. The heavy metals and synthetic liquid wolfsbane that had saturated her bone marrow for 15 years were finally being violently purged. To the human world, the symptoms would mirror the most brutal narcotics detox, tachycardia, profound diaphoresis, and severe neurological rebounding. Dr. Harrison had consulted securely with a trusted lycanthrope hematologist, posing as a researcher at the Mayo Clinic to confirm the chemical half-life of the poison, ensuring the flush would not trigger sudden cardiac arrest. But medical assurance did little to soften the agonizing reality playing out in the guest suite of the Silver Pines pack house. Maeve thrashed against the silk sheets, her spine arching backward as a guttural, tearing scream ripped from her throat. Her skin was alternating between burning with a severe fever and freezing from cold sweats. "Hold her down, Gideon!" Kalen barked over the sound of her cries, his own heart shattering with every sound of her distress. Harrison, her heart rate is spiking again. Do something. I cannot give her sedatives. My king, Dr. Harrison shouted back, his hands stained with the blood he had drawn to monitor her toxicity levels. If I suppress her nervous system now, the wolf's bane will resettle in the tissue. Her wolf is fighting its way to the surface. It has to burn the poison out itself. You must anchor her, Kalen. Use the bond, Kalen cursed, tossing his bloodied shirt aside. He climbed onto the massive bed, his massive frame dwarfing Maeve's thrashing body. He didn't restrain her with force. Instead, he enveloped her, pulling her back flush against his chest, wrapping his heavy arms securely around her trembling form to keep her from injuring herself. He buried his face in her damp, sweat-soaked hair, releasing the full, unadulterated weight of his alpha aura. Normally, an alpha king's aura was a weapon of submission, but through the mating bond, Kalen altered the frequency, turning the suffocating pressure into a warm, heavy blanket of pure, protective dominance. I am here, Maeve. Kalen pushed the thought through their mental link, a tether that was growing stronger with every passing second. I have you. Fight it. Break the cage. Inside Maeve's mind, the world was a blinding white storm of agony. For years, she had felt an empty, hollow void where her spirit should have been. Now, that void was filled with a roaring, furious fire. She could see the cage, a twisted, blackened construct of chemical suppression that had trapped a magnificent, ethereal creature in the darkest corners of her subconscious. The creature was massive, far larger than an average female wolf. It paced relentlessly against the dissolving bars of its prison, its coat a blinding, pure snow white, its eyes identical to Maeve's startling emerald green. Let me out! The ancient, primal voice echoed in Maeve's skull, vibrating with a decade and a half of unspent rage. Let us protect ourselves. It hurts, Maeve sobbed aloud in the physical world, her fingernails digging violently into Kalen's forearms, drawing blood. He didn't flinch. I know, my brave girl. I know it hurts, Kalen murmured against her ear, his voice thick with unshed tears. But the pain means you are alive. The pain means he didn't win. Push through it. Come into me. As Kalen's words resonated through the bond, Maeve stopped fighting the fire and leaned into it. She grabbed hold of the mental bars of the cage and, with the combined strength of her newly awakened spirit and her king's anchoring power, she shattered them. In the guest suite, the temperature in the room plummeted abruptly. Gideon and Dr. Harrison took a sharp step back as a shockwave of raw, unbridled energy blasted outward from the bed, shattering the glass of the bedside lamps and cracking the heavy oak wardrobe across the room. It was not the oppressive, commanding aura of Kalen Hawthorne. This was the aura of a queen pure, ancient, and blindingly fierce. Maeve gasped, her eyes flying open. The dull, lifeless brown of her irises had vanished, replaced by a glowing, luminescent emerald green. Her bones began to pop and snap with a sickeningly loud crescendo. She is shifting, Dr. Harrison breathed in awe, dropping to his knees and exposing his neck in pure, instinctual submission to the overwhelming power filling the room. Gideon did the same, unable to stand against the sheer magnitude of the newly freed alpha female. Kalen quickly rolled away, giving her the space she needed, as her human form gave way to the beast. The transition, usually painful for a first-timer, was surprisingly fluid, driven by a wolf desperate to finally stretch its limbs. Where the frail, bruised, and broken 21-year-old girl had been, a monstrously beautiful wolf now stood. She was breathtaking. Her fur was the color of fresh snowfall, thick and pristine. She stood nearly as tall as Kalen's own midnight black wolf would, her musculature sleek and built for lethal speed. The white wolf shook out her coat, her massive paws sinking into the ruined mattress. She looked at Dr. Harrison and Gideon, a low, warning growl vibrating in her chest. It is all right, my beautiful queen, Kalen said softly, slowly getting to his feet. He did not lower his head, he was her equal, her mate, but he held out a scarred hand, his gray eyes shining with absolute reverence. They are our pack. They are safe. The white wolf snapped her jaws, turning her glowing emerald eyes toward Kalen. The tension in the room was palpable as the two dominant predators assessed each other. Then, the wolf let out a soft, chuffing sound. She closed the distance between them, pressing her massive, cold nose against Kalen's chest, directly over his heart. Kalen buried his hands in her thick fur, resting his forehead against hers. The bond snapped perfectly into place, a permanent, unbreakable bridge of steel and starlight connecting their souls. The crippling loneliness that had defined Maeve's entire existence was vaporized in an instant, replaced by the overwhelming, unconditional love and ferocious loyalty of the Alpha King. The healing had begun. The rapid cellular regeneration intrinsic to lycanthropes, suppressed for years by the wolfsbane, flooded Maeve's system. In her wolf form, the cracked ribs knit themselves back together flawlessly. The deep bruises faded. The malnutrition that had stunted her human body was actively being repaired by the magic in her blood. "We are free," the wolf purred in Kaelin's mind, her voice a rich, melodic echo. "You are free," Kaelin replied, his mental voice a vow. "Now, my queen, it is time to take out the trash." The stone walls of the subterranean holding cells wept with moisture, the cold dampness clinging to the stagnant air like a desperate ghost. For 15 years, this oppressive atmosphere had been Maeve Kensington's entire universe. It was the chill that had settled into her bones, the darkness that had suffocated her dormant wolf. But as she descended the spiraling stone steps now, the cold could no longer touch her. The newly awakened, ferocious heat of her inner beast, a magnificent, snow-white alpha wolf, radiated from her core, an unbreakable furnace of power and absolute certainty. She had shifted back to her human form only an hour ago, but the frail, bruised, and terrified girl who had cowered in the banquet hall was dead. In her place stood a woman transformed. The lycanthrope healing factor, finally free from the toxic cage of synthetic wolfsbane, had worked a miracle. Her skin, once sallow and marked with violence, now flushed with vibrant, untouchable health. Her posture was straight, her shoulders pulled back, radiating a quiet, predatory grace. Dressed in dark tactical gear pulled from the Royal Guard's armory, heavy combat boots that echoed like war drums against the stone, charcoal gray cargo pants, and a fitted black jacket, she looked exactly like what she was born to be. A queen. Kaelin Hawthorne walked half a step behind her. The Alpha King did not crowd her, nor did he attempt to lead. This was her dominion now, her moment of absolute reclamation. His immense, terrifying presence was simply a shadow cast by her light, a silent vow that the entire weight of the unified North American pack stood at her back. Beside Kaelin walked Gideon, the King's beta, clutching a thick, leather-bound portfolio that held the absolute destruction of Garrett Kensington's world. The heavy iron door at the end of the corridor loomed ahead. It was the exact same door she had pounded on in blind terror when the basement pipes had burst. Now, as Gideon stepped forward and turned the heavy iron key, the screech of the rusty hinges sounded like a victory cry. Garrett was shackled to a heavy steel chair bolted to the center of the concrete floor. The silver-laced chains hissed faintly where they met his wrists, leaving raw, angry burns that his fractured healing factor struggled to close. The meticulously groomed, untouchable corporate titan was entirely gone. His bespoke suit was ruined, stained with his own blood and cellar dirt. His face was a swollen, bruised mess from the single, devastating blow Kaelin had delivered the night before. When the heavy door swung open, Garrett jerked his head up, his eyes, bleary and desperate, locked onto Maeve. The breath hitched violently in his throat. He could feel it immediately, the crushing, suffocating weight of her alpha aura. It was not the unrefined, chaotic energy of a newly shifted pup. It was ancient, pure, and terrifyingly dominant. "Maeve," Garrett croaked, his voice cracking pitifully. Instinctively, he tried to project the fatherly command that had kept her paralyzed in fear for over a decade. He tried to pull on the invisible strings of his own alpha spark, but against her aura, his power felt like a flickering candle in a hurricane. "Maeve, you must listen to me. They are lying to you. I did what I had to do. You were sick, unstable. The pack needed a strong leader. I was protecting you. Be quiet," Maeve commanded softly. She didn't shout. She didn't snarl. But the absolute, undeniable authority in her voice hit Garrett like a physical sledgehammer. His jaw snapped shut, his teeth clicking together so hard he tasted fresh blood. He stared at her, wide-eyed, horrified by the realization that his carefully constructed cage had been permanently obliterated. Maeve paced slowly around the bolted chair, her heavy boots scuffing rhythmically against the concrete. She took in the sight of the chains, the damp walls, the absolute isolation. She let the silence stretch, forcing Garrett to marinate in his own mounting terror. "For 15 years, you convinced me that I was a parasite," Maeve began, her voice steady, chillingly calm, and completely devoid of the tears she had shed the day before. She stopped directly in front of him, forcing him to look up into her glowing emerald eyes. "You beat me. You locked me in the dark. You poisoned my food with wolfsbane every single day so that you could steal my mother's legacy. You chemically castrated my soul so you could trade my inheritance for timber contracts and political influence. You played the grieving widower to the world and played the monster behind closed doors. I built an empire," Garrett suddenly snapped, a pathetic, desperate surge of narcissistic ego pushing past his terror. The chains rattled as he strained forward. The Rosalind estate portfolio was wasted sitting in a trust for a useless child. I turned Silver Pines into the wealthiest pack in the Pacific Northwest. Apex Timber Holdings employs thousands. You owe me your life, you ungrateful. A low, ground-shaking snarl ripped from Kalen's chest, the king stepping forward with his eyes flashing brilliant gold. But Maeve simply raised a single hand. Kalen stopped instantly, bowing his head slightly in deference to his mate. This was her kill. You built a house of cards, Maeve corrected, her tone dropping to a lethal whisper. She turned her head slightly. Gideon, show him the ashes. Gideon stepped into the dim light of the cell, flipping open the heavy leather portfolio. He did not look at Garrett with anger, but with absolute, clinical disdain. As of 8 a.m. this morning, Alpha Garrett, the human authorities have dismantled your empire, Gideon stated, his voice ringing clearly off the stone walls. Agents from the Department of Justice and the Securities and Exchange Commission executed federal warrants on the Apex Timber Holdings corporate headquarters in downtown Seattle. They have seized all physical assets, servers, and paper ledgers. Garrett's face, already pale, drained of the last remnants of color. No, that's impossible. My lawyers, my fixers. Your lawyers at Kirkland & Ellis are currently fully cooperating with the federal government in exchange for immunity against racketeering charges. Gideon continued smoothly, turning a page. Furthermore, the FBI Cybercrimes Division has traced your elaborate embezzlement routes. They tracked the funds from the dummy corporations in Delaware, straight through your supposedly secure accounts at Chase Bank and Wells Fargo. Your accounts are frozen. The offshore accounts have been legally seized and reverted to Maeve's name. The human media has already broken the story on the morning broadcasts. You are no longer a respected CEO, Garrett. You are broke, and you are the subject of the largest federal manhunt for corporate fraud and tax evasion in the state's history. Garrett slumped against the heavy steel chair, the remaining fight leaving his body in a rushed, panicked exhale. The werewolf world operated in absolute secrecy, existing parallel to human society. A werewolf could survive losing a territorial dispute or a pack fight, but exposure to the human justice system, especially for massive, high-profile federal financial crimes that left an undeniable, mile-long paper trail, was a death sentence. There was nowhere to run. No pack in North America would harbor a fugitive who brought federal heat and the FBI directly to their borders. Kalen hadn't just defeated him. He had meticulously erased him from the earth. You could have just killed me, Garrett whispered, his voice trembling as he stared at the damp concrete floor, unable to look his daughter in the eye. Why didn't you just let the king challenge me? Why didn't you let him tear my throat out? Maeve knelt slowly, bringing her face level with the man who had destroyed her childhood. There was no pity in her heart, only a cold, resolved finality. Because death by the king's hand is a warrior's death, Maeve said softly. In the Lycan world, you would be remembered by some as an alpha who fell defending his territory, a martyr to your loyalists. I absolutely refuse to give you that dignity. She stood up to her full height, her aura flaring brilliantly. The sheer force of her power pressed down on Garrett, forcing his head down until his chin rested on his chest. I, Maeve Kensington, rightful alpha heir of the Silver Pines Pack and queen of the Unified Territories, hereby strip you of your rank and your blood tie, she declared. Her voice echoed with the ancient binding magic of pack law, resonating through the very bedrock of the estate. Garrett screamed. It was a harrowing, guttural sound of pure agony as the invisible, spiritual tether connecting him to the Silver Pines wolves violently snapped. The severance of the alpha spark tore through his nervous system, aging him a decade in a matter of seconds. His hair thinned and grayed instantly. His remaining muscle mass withered into nothing. He was no longer an alpha. He was just a broken, terrified old man. You are banished, Maeve finished, turning her back on him completely. Gideon's enforcers are going to load you into an unmarked transport, drive you to the edge of the territory, and hand you over directly to the U.S. Marshals waiting at the border. You will spend the rest of your miserable human life rotting in a concrete cell in a federal penitentiary, completely cut off from the moon and the wild. You are nothing to me. Without waiting for a response, Maeve walked toward the heavy iron door. Kalen stepped aside, his chest swelling with profound, overwhelming pride as he watched his mate step fully into her power and deliver her absolute justice. As they walked up the spiraling stone steps, leaving Garrett's pathetic sobbing echoing in the dark beneath the earth, Kalen reached out. He caught Maeve's hand in his, intertwining their fingers securely. The bond between them hummed a bright, beautiful song of victory and newly minted freedom. How do you feel? Kalen asked gently, his thumb tracing the back of her hand. Maeve paused at the top of the stairs. She looked out at the grand foyer of the pack house, a place that had once represented an inescapable, gilded cage. Now, it was just a building, one she never had to fear again. She looked up at Kaelin, the ruthless Alpha King who had knelt in broken glass to save her life. "I feel," Maeve said, a small, genuine smile finally breaking through the shadows to touch her lips, like it's time to go home. The tragedy of Maeve Kensington was a dark chapter closed by the light of a king's unyielding devotion. She did not remain at Silver Pines. The estate was left under the capable governance of Gideon's trusted deputies, while the pack healed from the systemic corruption of Garrett's regime. Maeve returned with Kaelin to the royal stronghold, stepping into her role not just as a survivor, but as a formidable queen. The transition from a broken, poisoned girl to a reigning alpha female was fraught with the challenges of trauma and recovery, but she was never forced to face the shadows alone. Kaelin proved that true strength lies not in the breaking of spirits, but in the fiercely protective love that allows them to heal. Together, they ruled the territories with an iron fist against tyranny and an unprecedented compassion for the vulnerable, forever changing the legacy of their world.